Hello and welcome to The Punt, our monthly show looking ahead to the biggest Irish sporting events, both at home and abroad, brought to you in association with William Hill. Please remember to gamble responsibly and visit dunlewy.net on how to do so. Gavan Casey here, and I'm looking forward to previewing the small ball finals this weekend. We're going to look at both hurling and camogie with Sinead Farrell of The42. Sinead, how are you?
How are you doing, Gav?
Very well, thank you very much. We've got Fintan O'Toole as well, GA editor, boss man with 42 also. How are you, Fint?
Hey, Gav, how's it going?
Super, thank you. And we've got Shane Stapleton of No Fixed Publication, his own man in many ways. And we're expecting him to give an independent view here on the point today. How are you, Shane?
I'm good, yeah. I've nailed my colours firmly to the Our Game mast since setting it up there a year and a half ago. So you can call me the Our Game man at this stage. But yeah, can't wait for this match.
Super, yeah. Oh no, I was going to get the Our Game plugged in. Don't worry about that. You are a sole trader at the moment. Fair play to you. It's great to see that going well. So listen, we're going to start with the hurling, and there are loads of strands to this. I think if you had said to people from Waterford especially that they were going to be looking at an All-Ireland final at all this year, not to mention in December, obviously they would have probably called the guards on you. So how has this happened, Fintan, where Liam Cahill has managed to steer this team into an All-Ireland final against the odds, and particularly given how poor they've been in the championship over the last couple of years?
Well, I think first of all you have to give a lot of credit to him, what he's done. He kind of, he's a quite brilliant track record if you look at it, with the amount of All-Ireland finals he's been in at various underage grades with Tipperary since 2015, and he's been hugely successful. He's won finals in different ways, and he's a really good coaching team with him. His kind of sidekick Mikey Bevans is really highly rated, so I guess from the Waterford County Board's viewpoint, I think it was a pretty imaginative appointment, and they went for him, it seems, pretty quickly, judging what he has said himself after the under-20 final last year. So he came on board, he made a lot of big calls straight away and kind of shaking up the squad, a few established figures dropping out. And they kind of hit the ground running, really. I suppose the season has been kind of so disrupted that, the whole preparation element of it completely changed the way he would have been thinking. It was going to be a round-robin format, and then it ended up going back to the old-style knockout. So he had them primed for that game against Cork. And the way the draw was, whoever won that game, you had a really, really good chance because you were on that side of the draw in Munster straight into a final. And ever since then, they've really taken off. And I suppose you're saying that maybe at the start of the year, people wouldn't have thought it. I'd say at halftime of the Kilkenny game, people wouldn't have thought it either. I think it was probably the biggest turnaround I think I've seen from a team within one game, because they were so poor in the first half in various facets of their play, and then they were just absolutely sensational in the second half. And now they're I suppose the repeat of the Munster final again, and they're one win away from ending 61-year wait and kind of the last big hurling famine, I guess, in terms of landing the Liam McCarthy Cup.
Yeah, Sinead, did that turnaround against Kilkenny almost change the perception of this Waterford team a little bit? Like, it seemed as though they were plucky upstarts to that point, and they'd done incredibly well to get that far, and it might have been a season upon which to really build. But then they produced this second half performance, which blows everybody away. And suddenly I think you're looking at an All-Ireland final against Limerick, this juggernaut, in which you wouldn't necessarily have Limerick as roasting hot favourites, if you could put it that way.
Yeah, would you believe I was actually back from the All-Ireland camogie semi-finals when that was happening? And I think I checked my phone maybe before I left, or I'm not sure what stage I was in the journey, and Kilkenny were well in front, and I was kind of like, okay, right, well, that's kind of what I expected. Waterford have they've had a couple of bad years. People were really kind of scratching their heads as to what was going on with them. So I kind of expected Kilkenny to sort of railroad them and book their place in the final. And then I came home, I parked the car, and suddenly the world had turned its axis that Waterford had come back like that and gotten back into a final. And it's brilliant for them. Like, obviously it's great for the sport as well. You don't want it to just be confined to the same sort of strongholds all the time. It's great for them to get back into a final. Like, this is the thing, like, everybody's kind of looking at Limerick that, it's theirs to kind of lose, that Waterford are almost kind of lucky to get there, but it's not that long ago since they were in a final. I think it maybe seems like a bit longer because they've had those few really bad years where they were struggling in that round robin series. Like, everybody else was delighted when the Munster Championship and the Leinster Championship had been converted into this round robin series, but Waterford were really kind of struggling with it. And then, as kind of Fintan pointed out there, Liam Cahill comes in, totally changes their approach. Like Desi Hutchinson's made such an impact as well. I was looking back at just the footage from the Munster final today, and even watching him against Clare as well. Like, I mean, he's such a goal poacher, and Stephen Bennett as well has made such an impact for them as well. He was actually up for press duty there not so long ago, and I was talking to him, and we brought up obviously Desi Hutchinson and how well he's done for them. And one of the things he mentioned was obviously Desi's coming back in from a soccer environment, and he said that like they're actually learning a lot from his footwork and his running technique, that he's bringing so much of that element into their game as well. So it's brilliant for them that they've managed to do that. But I must have been the only person in the country who actually didn't get to see them execute that turnaround live.
Jane, I know you would have had both of your eyes on it firmly, and again, like just a sensational performance by Waterford. We're probably blue in the face from talking about it now, and it's a chance for them, as Fintan says, to just end the drought. There's no point in looking back on brilliant turnarounds if you don't get the job done at the end of the season. But these two teams have had really divergent paths on paper towards this final. If you think about, we're saying Waterford people would never have expected to be in this final, be it from the start of the season or even at halftime in that Kilkenny match. Limerick fans, as much as they wouldn't admit it necessarily, like the carpet has been rolled out for this Limerick team since throwing in Munster, really. People have been talking about them being nearly unstoppable since before they've actually poked the ball. Waterford, obviously, the complete opposite is true, and yet they have been the two standout teams. So, to your mind, where are both teams coming into this final? Is it the case that Limerick have done basically what's expected of them? Waterford have greatly exceeded expectations, and we're left with a borderline 50-50, or would you still sort of see Limerick as the A side in this matchup, if you know what I mean, in terms of just having that little bit of muscle memory from 2018 and having been there and ended their own drought already?
I think the fact that the last number of days that I've gone from thinking Limerick are going to do this to Waterford and over and back a few times, and then I'm unsure, that gives a fair indication that, my guess is as good as anybody else's. But Limerick are going for 10 wins out of 10 this season in competitive action between league and championship, and that's very impressive. And to do it without 2/3 of your full backline, and I know Richie English is back in the squad, but he's clearly, they don't feel like throwing him in at this stage. So the fact that they've adjusted, they've been able to rejig their team. And to be honest, I don't think they've been fully tested yet to see how much of a difference does it make to have Dan Morrissey full back, to move all the pieces around. And I think they'll find a way of putting Keane Lynch back midfield, because I don't think that they're playing at 100% at the moment. I think they miss him out in midfield. I think Gillane, between his ribs and the fact that his finger is so heavily bandaged and he's mishitting balls a little bit, he's certainly spilling balls. I think they don't look 100% right. But what I'd say about Waterford is their change just overnight. The light switch has been incredible. And Liam Cahill and Mikey Beavens, who's with him, two corner forwards, might add, they're after taking a Waterford team that between 2010 and 2018 in championship they averaged 22 points a game. Now, is that going to win you an All-Ireland? It might win you a match and it might win you an All-Ireland, but it won't over the course of the season be enough to win you an All-Ireland. And then after his first 4 games of this championship, they'd averaged 29 points a game. Sorry, after the first 3. And then they actually scored 227 against Kilkenny. So they're up near 30 points a game now, all of a sudden, from 22. And the first game of the year that I saw them playing was against Cork in Walsh Park. And I think they'd conceded maybe 2-1 or something like that after 5 minutes. And you thought, same old Watford again, capitulation. But no, they came back and won the game. And how much is it to do with Liam Cahill in the space of a couple of months? Can you turn it around? I don't know. But like, if you jump back to 2016, when he was over the minors and he dropped a few players, I think, and he was trying to get rid of the dual issue with Tipperary. And he did an interview and he goes, there are 1 or 2 players that we let off early in the year that are doing a bit of crying, and their mammies and daddies are doing a bit of crying that they're not in the squad. I have the biggest job preparing the next generation of young hurlers, the future hurlers for Tipperary, and I'm not going to send a group of soft fellas up the line. And that, I think, is the kind of manager you're dealing with here. And a lot of people have a huge amount of time for what Derek McGrath did with Waterford, including myself. I think he did brilliantly, but he sort of has comparatively a soft soap approach with players, whereas Cahill maybe a little bit more aloof, maybe a little bit different, harder. And he's changed around his panel and he's cut guys loose. And if you said a year ago, Waterford will get to an All-Ireland final without Noel Connors, without Pádraig Mahoney, Philip Mahoney, without Maura Shanahan, people would think you're nuts. But he's changed it around and he's found a way to just infuse it with power and pace all over the field. And a lot of it has to come back to him. Like And I just one final point before I throw it back to you. Between 2016 and 2019, his underage teams, which were All-Ireland winner minor, All-Ireland under 21, All-Ireland 20, he's now going for the clean sweep. They scored 47 goals in championship matches. 47, which is absolutely insane. So he has to be a huge amount to do with it. But 50-50 game for me.
Love it. Fintan, just talk to me about the names there that Shane mentioned who aren't in this panel, and how I think when Liam Cahill did decide to go on without them, it felt like, okay, a fresh start, but also one in which you're missing key names, and this might take a lot longer to build, really. This might be a long-term plan on Cahill's behalf, whereby he does start to flood youngsters and it becomes maybe a 3-year plan or a 3-year process. And yet, even without those influential figures, both on the pitch and in the dressing room, they've, as Shane says, almost overnight with the click of fingers, turned into a drastically better team. So clearly it's vindication for Cahill in omitting those players. Probably tough on those players though, some of whom, like I know Morris even earlier in the year was talking about getting back into the Waterford panel and so on. So it does show a sort of a ruthlessness to Cahill to which Shane alludes there, and one which it clearly has its benefits from what we can see.
Absolutely. It's important to remember it's not the first time in kind of modern Waterford hurling that there has been a big cull. I think it was after Shane probably when it was I think it was after the 2014 season, that Derek McGrath, his first season, that he got rid of a lot of guys who were pretty established. And like Cahill has made the point as well, I suppose a lot of the focus was on Noel Connors and Maura Shanahan, given their standing. But there were other players who, for various reasons, have dropped away. A couple of retirements. I mean, probably the most notable one for me was Philip Manny in January, a guy who I think everyone would say was still hurling at a really high level. Was excellent again for his club this year, Ballygunner, and getting to a senior. So he was another guy that I thought if you took him out of it, and then his brother Porrick getting injured. So it wasn't just, I guess, the decisions Cahill made in terms of guys getting rid of it. He lost a couple of others kind of unlucky as well, but he's given a good few guys kind of their chance. Stephen Bennett has kind of become, I think, the leader of the team. And I think when you drill a bit deeper, say someone like him, I think it was at least 2, if not 3 hip operations he had before he started the 2019 season. So arguably for a guy who was, huge underage potential, he never really maybe got a proper run at it. And last season he seemed to be very fit all through. And even though Waterford was struggling, he was scoring well. They got Desi Hutchinson back. I think one of the things they actually got very lucky with was the season disruption, because what that did for Tadhg de Burke. Because Tadhg de Burke tore his cruciate in September 2019. And by the management submission, and you talk to guys in his club, he wouldn't have been ready if it was a normal championship come May or June. And I don't think Waterford would be in this position without him and with his form. But the extra break, like by the time that the inter-county game came back in September, October, he was absolutely flying. And to me, he's added a different level of his game in terms of, I suppose there was a lot of criticism during Derek McGrath's time about the sweeper approach. He's really attacking now a lot more. It's not just kind of getting up possession and kind of clearing it downfield. He's coming forward with the ball. And there was a moment, I think, when he got the point against Kilkenny, that was kind of the insurance score. It might have been the last one, but it kind of put them 3 up, I think it was. I was just thinking, God, if this place was full, the Waterford fans, that would be kind of the moment that they really would have been kind of off their feet. And then obviously, like Sinead mentioned, Desi Hutchinson, that's probably a bit of luck that's fell Cahill's way, in that he was a guy that wasn't available to any Waterford manager before. He came back in last year, probably a bit too kind of late in the club scene really to kind of force his way into the county reckoning. But, it was such a persuasive argument with how he was playing for Ballygunner, and then he came back into it. So kind of all those elements have, I think, kind of come together to maybe kind of compensate for the loss of the big players that I suppose, and those calls he kind of made last winter.
Yeah, so maybe there is an element of fortune, Sinead. You obviously need it if you're going to go on and win an All-Ireland, and that applies to any team. For John Colley and Limerick, then it seems as though it's more or less going to plan. I think, barring one, they've probably not had injury problems. They have used only, I think, 22 players across their 4 championship games this season, but he's had basically a full complement to select from. Then again, we look at Aaron Gillane, and as Shane mentions, he's a little bit black and blue at this point. He's probably not firing on all cylinders. It looks as though he is going to play this weekend, winning the race, or winning his fitness battle, as the phrase goes. do they though, with an only half fit Aaron Gillane, sort of miss something, Limerick, that actually keeps teams like Waterford and the teams they've played so far a little bit closer to them? And like, if you juxtapose that with somebody like Tyke Burke and the influence he has on Waterford, to see him in full flight for Waterford, there are massive psychological boosts in that. You know, you see him come out and claim a ball against whoever towards the end of a game. As Fintan says, imagine if crowds were there, but even without crowds, that's just such a buoying moment for teammates. Whereas for Gillane, like, maybe he's not kind of getting those scores that he would have gotten that would have had a similar impact on the team, if you know what I mean. So just talk to us a little bit about Gillane's likely inclusion, but the fact that he'll be maybe playing at sort of 75%, if you like.
Yeah, like, I was looking a bit kind of more closely at Aaron Gillane, and I mean, the first kind of reports we got after he'd been taken off with the injury was that he was 50-50 to make the final. And then suddenly, you know, you read another report and the Limerick leader are saying that he was back training and that he's winning his battle, his fifth battle to put himself in the shop window for team selection. And so there's a bit of that kind of GAQ tourism, or the kind of bogey team, there's the like, keep the head down and don't let them know, or, you know, if anything, let people think that Aaron Gillane is not maybe right or maybe not going to start. I think, like, even if when the team is announced, and we presume it's probably going to be announced on Friday night, even if he's not in the team at that stage, that doesn't mean that he's not going to start. He could very well make an appearance on Sunday. And I mean, I know you mentioned Tyke Burke there. I think Waterford could win without Tyke Burke. I'm not sure Limerick could win without Aaron Gillane. I think he's too important. I think he's such a good free taker. He's good at winning frees as well. I think he's a great size for a forward, that he can win frees. He can, you know, he comes out, he gets the ball, someone's in on top of him, and he can pull a player down and he can score them himself. And he did that against Galway quite well. And he even got he can score from distance as well. He got a ball in at one stage and got a score in, I think, over his shoulder off Daithí Burke, which is not easy done on a brilliant kind of tight man marker like him. So I think he's too important to them. He's been one of their best forwards for the past couple of years, so important to their 2018 success. He's a real, you know, leader in the team as well. And I think, even on the issue of crowds, like, a lot of people might think that will favour Waterford. I'm not sure. I think it could favour either team, because crowds are great. They're brilliant for atmosphere and generating that bit of kind of buzz on match day. But crowds really only work with you when you're doing well. Like, you score a goal, you get a block, you get a hook, the crowd absolutely gets behind you, and it can definitely push you on. You get a few wides or you hit a few bad passes, the crowd, not saying that your own fans, but just the general hum of the crowd can start to work against you. And you can have, like, you know, the odd person sitting in the lower tiers, don't tell me the player can't hear them saying something and giving them grief. That can work against any player, and that's Waterford or Limerick. And there's players in both teams that have played in All-Ireland finals. Like, they know what crowds can bring. And we've seen how eerie it is without having them there in the stadium. But I don't know if that's necessarily something that Waterford needs as an advantage to get over Limerick. I think it very well work in Limerick's favour as well. And like, teams, loads of players, loads of managers have already said this during the season, that it's sort of just got to create and generate their own atmosphere or their own sort of buzz. Really, it's really kind of your players, your subs, your management. Obviously now you're going to have your extended panel members in there. They're going to be the fans, I suppose. But even that, like, if you get a few misses, if you hit a few wides, I think it's going to be much easier for both sets of players to put that aside and reset. Whereas if you had crowds there, that would work against you. And I think, you know, Limerick, they're human just like everybody else. Like, a crowd working against you can definitely rattle a player. And I like, obviously they've got match experience, I know that, but it's not necessarily a thing that Waterford needed to help them get a win over Limerick.
Shane, how human are Limerick? And if I was to put it to you that a lot of people would be approaching this game from the point of view of wondering, how do Waterford beat Limerick, having already played them in the championship? I often think the more interesting question is, how do Limerick beat Waterford again? And how do you kind of psychologically prepare yourself for that type of game where, you know, you came out on the right side of it the last day, you probably were the better team, arguably are the better team, but the onus is going to be on Waterford to find areas in which they need to improve and might be a little bit more difficult to improve from a winning position, if you like.
Well, I think Waterford needs to probably get more in the All-Ireland final from Jack Fagan and Austin Gleeson than they got from them in the Munster final. And also Jamie Barron, who's growing into the season and he's approaching 2017 form. By the way, I don't think he's quite at that yet. He should have been hurler of the year that year. But I think they need him to be a little bit more secure on the ball than that game. Now, he has been in the game since. But it's just, I think there was more to be got out of him. There's more out of Ozzy. There's more out of, like Desi Hutchinson. He got 1 point. But a lot of that is about getting on the front foot and winning the battle of the middle eight. But one thing I thought was very interesting was a piece of analysis done by Sean Flynn, and he put it out online. He was Tipperary's video analyst the last couple of years. And he was showing how very much Waterford have changed. Between 2017 and 2019, only a quarter of the balls that they were delivering to their forward line were kind of outside the 65, whereas that changed to 45% this year. So obviously, the less distance a delivery has to travel, the less chance someone else has of intercepting it. So I think if they can deliver the ball in right and into the likes of, whether it's like if Desi and Ozzy are inside, I mean, what a potent inside forward line potentially if you're getting good ball on the front foot in there. And just like a couple of you mentioned Stephen Bennett earlier. He was on the All-Ireland minor winning team in 2013, scoring 4 points in the final. He scored 2 goals in the final in 2016 to win the under-21. And like these two teams are actually really closely aligned in the last, we'll say 7 or 8 years underage, probably even before that at younger age grades. Because like 2013, I just looked at all the famines that the two sets of players have busted in the last number of years. Like the Limerick Miners, they ended a 29-year wait for a minor title in 2013. Later that year, Waterford went on and won it through the back door, the All-Ireland, ending a 65-year wait. 2016, Waterford won their first Munster title since '94. Then they went on to win a first All-Ireland in 24 years. Then Limerick, 2018, obviously won the All-Ireland, first for 45 years. And then the same group of players won the first league title for 22 years last year and retained it. So like, for my money, these players have come up a lot at the same era and won a lot, both at the expense of each other and kind of, during each other's time at the top. So I think there's no reason for an inferiority complex for either team here. And that's another reason I think it's so close. But I think for Limerick to kind of expose or to try and improve, it's about where does Cian Lynch go, and will Peter Casey come in? Because I've heard some suggestions. I was chatting to Kieran Carey, and he thinks maybe Peter Casey would come in centre forward, and that would put Cian Lynch back out to midfield. And like I was talking again, if he's facing forward rather than getting the ball with his back to goal as he often do at centre forward, that can kind of take them on another level. And then like with Kyle Hayes, he was able to collect an awful lot of puck outs short in the Munster final, turn and run with them. Like very few people could keep into him. So, can Gerard Hegarty, can he kick on? Like Caleb Lyons kept him somewhat quiet in that Munster final. Will Tom Morrissey repeat his form at the semi-final? So who will Limerick actually go after? Will they think, right, well, Kevin Moran is 32, 33, and will they be like Ian Kenny and Shane McNulty aren't massive cornerbacks? So there's a lot of areas there that both teams will be looking to go after, but no reason for an inferiority complex either side.
Fintan, to what extent does ending a drought like that at underage ease the potential angst of facing a similar situation when you move up to senior? So for, as Shane says, both teams have done it, or players on both teams that as they've moved up through the ranks have ended these droughts. But does it help Waterford this weekend that they have players who've done so at underage level, or when you get up to this senior level and you're playing for the first All-Ireland since '59, is that a sort of like, it probably feels like a different weight of expectation, if you like, or a different weight of history on their shoulders, despite the fact that they have ended those droughts in the past?
I think it's a huge help to them having won those underage, and there's a natural kind of progression, as Shane pointed out, minor 13, 21, 16, maybe the senior happened a small bit earlier than some of them would have thought. And even the senior final appearance, in 17. And even some of the guys, like Stephen Bennett actually didn't play any part in that 17 final. Connor Prunty has kind of come on since. So there's other extra guys who have this kind of winning underage experience to come into it. So I think that does help Waterford. I personally believe the lack of crowds and all that, I think that's a huge help to them, because, we were down at the press evening last week and talking to them. Porrick Manny, who's injured, was kind of making the point that he said when his brother retired this year, one of the first things he thought of was, God, I'm going to face some headache with tickets down the road, because that's half of the ticket allocation for our family gone. And he was just saying, for the younger guys, that's completely gone out of the equation. Then Conor Prunty was asked, does it feel like the All-Ireland final? And he goes, no, not at all, because I'm meeting nobody. He said he's studying in CIT, but he's studying from home at the moment. So he said unless he goes to the shop, he's not really encountering any players. And I mean, if you think back to 2008, like, it was absolutely madness down there for the couple of weeks beforehand, because that team had been trying for so long to get to a final. They finally did, and it was just this big explosion of joy. And then obviously we saw the machine that they ran into in Kilkenny in the final. There was a bit of that in 17 as well, I think, because they put so much into the 15 and 16 seasons trying to get over the line in the semi-finals, and they've been beaten by Kilkenny twice. They finally did it in 17 against Cork, and then got into the final. Whereas this time it's just so much more low key, and like it's the point Sinead was making, it's definitely true. The crowd can kind of work with and against you, but just the one favour the Limerick lads have is that slightly little less bit of pressure on them, because they have won it. They don't have, like, Donald O'Grady was talking about this. He said he's delighted now to be involved as a selector in a team that have won one, instead of thinking the whole time about, like, as he was as a supporter in the build-up to 2018. He just said 45 years was a phrase in his head constantly, I think, in the build-up to the game. So I think that's kind of a slight advantage for these Waterford lads. The fact that they have that kind of underage success, and I just think it's that little bit more low-key, building up to it, and in the game itself. And they've shown as well in the manner in which they came back against Kilkenny that even if it does kind of go against them early on, that they have shown ability to kind of dig it out, which I think could be quite crucial on Sunday.
Yeah, Shane, like, as a man who plays the game as well, for you, like, you're well used to sort of big match preparation, if you like, during the week. So this is obviously on a grander scale, an inter-county All-Ireland final. But if Waterford players are saying that they don't even really feel as though it is one, does that almost fit their story arc of the season, if you like, in that they're coming in a little bit under the radar? And maybe when we're talking about the pressure or the weight of history of since 59, if that doesn't really feel like it's there at all, then they are going in kind of without that inhibition that maybe they went in with in 2008, in 2017.
There's definitely a point being made in not playing the game before you ever arrive at the stadium, and playing the occasion rather than the game. So two examples come to mind as you're asking me there. 2012, and again, this is a county final, it's not on this level, but like 2012 with the Coola team, we played our first county final against Kilmacud, this particular group. And beforehand, I think everyone was up the walls, kind of preparing for this game. And I was living in town, but in the morning, it was insisted that I go out to Dalkey to get a bus in together with the team. So I'm going half an hour the wrong way to come back the same way, just for a match, because everyone has to be together. And within that, some sort of motivational video is put on the bus. So everyone's getting revved up probably 2 hours, 3 hours before the game starts. We go out, we give a flat, terrible performance, and we lose by 7 points, and it never really hit the heights and performed the way we had. So there's how you don't do it. Then when we won the All-Ireland for the second time in 2018, so the complete other end of the scale. Now this obviously is a comparable situation to an All-Ireland inter-county, not the same level obviously or of quality, but in terms of occasion, I think players inter-county or club, this is a fairly big one. But by the time we got into that replay in 2018, we just gotten used to just drive to the game yourselves, lads. So we were going down in groups of 3 and 4 down to Portlaoise to play that replay, and it didn't take a phone call of us, so we were able to go there, just play the game and not get overwhelmed by the occasion. So from that point of view, I can see that there's an advantage in Waterford, not like 2008 where they had 2 open nights and there's thousands of people there, and you're completely pent up, and maybe you're emotionally or physically even tired before you start the game. So I think there's something in it, and that can help Waterford, yeah.
Fintan, we've been talking a lot about Waterford and how they might or might not have advantages, how they may go about winning the game. Maybe to an extent, Limerick are nearly coming in under the radar a small bit as well, despite the fact that they've been favourites among many to win this championship as it's gone on. Like, we're talking about a team here who, if they do win this weekend, they become almost automatically one of the great teams of the modern era, don't they? Just in terms of how they actually go about it, and particularly if they were to secure a convincing win. And by convincing, I mean really only 4 or 5 points again, but just more than a score, basically. they become a potential dynasty, probably, given the age profile of the team. And they become, you'd imagine, a huge example to counties who are going through droughts of their own now, including Cork and Munster, who can look at Limerick, how they develop players, how they've managed to kind of harness the energy of young people playing sport in the county. Many would argue to the detriment of the likes of Munster Rugby, who would have done the same thing in the previous decade. Like, Limerick do feel as though they're on the verge of potentially a mini takeover, if you like, or becoming the dominant force in the country at the moment.
They absolutely do, yeah. The one thing I suppose is that we've kind of been here before where we thought teams were going to take over. The main example had probably been Clare in 2013 with their underage success. And I suppose Tip in 2010 was the other one that we looked at. But I think the argument of winning a second All-Ireland that confirms your greatness, I would absolutely agree with that. And if you look at the other examples, like I've mentioned Clare, they didn't manage to get the second one, and the team has changed hugely since 2013 now. And like Tipperary, it took them till 16, and I remember that felt like a really defining game, the 16 final for a lot of those kind of older players, but they won it, and then they won it again last year. So a lot of them have 3 medals, so I think they're undisputed in terms of that kind of greatness tag now. Galway probably the other one in 2017, like that's the only one that they've managed to win, having been kind of knocking around for about 7 or 8 years. So I definitely think a second win elevates you. I mean, I suppose what Kilkenny have achieved over the last 15 years is kind of on another level, but if you think about these Limerick guys, like a lot of them lost a minor final in 2014. They win on Sunday. That would be their 4th All-Ireland since 2 under-21s and 2 seniors. And like the relentlessness of which they're winning other trophies, like winning a couple of league titles, you know, winning the Munsters. I mean, it's kind of Kilkenny-esque, really, what they were doing under Cody in the kind of noughties, that it was just like Kilkenny were routinely picking up leagues during that time. And, you know, there wasn't really kind of maybe much notice given to it. Like, so there's obviously a big kind of a winning mentality put into it. But I think there's a realization as well in Limerick. I think Kylie could have kind of drilled at home, someone like Donald Grady. As a county, they've been here before where, you know, they had brilliant underage success. Was it 2000, 2002? I think that was the years of the 3 under-21s. So there's a kind of a wider issue, you know, we don't want to squander that. You know, they got to a final in 2007, but they didn't make the breakthrough. And you just see it in the kind of relentlessness of which these guys kind of want to win, and the kind of competitiveness of the panel. I mean, like, I think they're possibly maybe have kind of a bit more options now than maybe even they did 2 years ago. Like, you look at a guy like Adrian Breen has come off the bench in the last 2 games, has got a point from play. He hadn't actually played in 5 years championship before he came on in the Munster Championship. Now, he's had a succession of really bad injuries, but like Shane would know him, you know, from playing against the Piercing. Like, he's probably been one of the best club forwards, I'd say, in the country, but it just hasn't happened for him. So like, you know, to be able to bring in a guy like that, and obviously the kind of rotation that like Peter Casey doesn't start the last day, then comes on, makes such an impact. We've kind of touched on the full back line. So I think they kind of realize that they have so much kind of talent at their disposal, and it's kind of about maximizing it. And they weren't looking to wait around after 2018. They kind of went hard at it last year, just kind of fell short of the semi-final. And I think there's a real big kind of a push on in this team that they need to kind of maximize this period.
Sinead, as we wind towards predictions, what separates the two teams for you this weekend? Is it perhaps even the bench, as Fintan alludes to there?
For me, the big thing about Limerick is their work rate. And I think Waterford, that's one area they're going to have to really zero in on to kind of match Limerick. I know it's an obvious quality that you expect from an inter-county team to have, but it was one thing I saw them bring in spades against Galway. Like, a lot of people brought up the fact that Galway made a lot of kind of schoolboy errors and stick work errors, but much of it was down to the fact that Limerick were just down their throats every time they were on the ball, that they kind of spooked them into making those mistakes. Like, I know Aidan Murphy got a bit of flack for his puckouts in particular, but the puckouts are kind of a two-way street. Like, he was targeting players, but then somebody would be in on top of them and they would lose possession really quickly, and that's down to Limerick's just their fight, their hunger. And, you know, Fintan obviously mentioned there about last year and how it all ended. Like, they were a controversial moment away from getting back to an All-Ireland final, and to me they play like a team that won't let themselves be prone to being like in a situation like that again. Like, if they're 4 or 5 points clear, that 65 that wasn't a 65 or was a 65 and they didn't get their 65, that doesn't happen. Now, I brought it up like Will O'Donoghue was up for press there a while ago, and I did mention it to him, but of course, like, he gives the diplomatic answer of like, oh yeah, no, we've parked that, we've forgotten about it. But it seems to me they've channeled that and they've evolved so well that they're playing like a team that
doesn't leave themselves exposed like that. So that's one area that I feel that Waterford are going to have to really target. And in fairness, they did a good bit in the Munster final. They did force them into a few mistakes and got some scores off it, but they'll have to kind of double it up, obviously, in the All-Ireland final. Another area I think that they will have to look at is obviously the long balls in. Like, that was one thing that Galway were doing a fair bit against Limerick, and the likes of Diarmaid Byrnes and Declan Hannon will sling the ball over the bar from long distance every day of the week. And I think even Cork, did that as well, and kind of didn't realise until it was too late that Waterford or that Limerick weren't going to be beaten that way. So they're gonna that's one thing they're gonna have to they won't be able to if they don't launch the ball in too far on them as well. Desi Hutchinson obviously and Stephen Bennett as well, releasing them is so key, and we touched on it before about how Hutchinson is such a good goal getter for Waterford as well. I think they're the kind of main areas that I would see the game being decided on.
Fintan, throwing it to yourself, break it down for us. What is the difference between these two teams this weekend?
I think Limerick are maybe just a little bit further on in the kind of development. The big question is, I suppose, we have an obvious game to reference this against, and it's looking at the Munster final and as regards what happened there, and whether Waterford can kind of bridge that gap. And goals have been a big thing for Waterford over the last couple of games, and kind of I suppose getting over the line against Clare and Kilkenny. And look, while it was brilliant attacking play, some of the defending was really, really poor against them. I mean, you think of one of the goals that they got against Clare, three Clare defenders go towards Desi Hutchinson, and he plays it across to Jack Fagan, who just taps it in. Limerick don't really give you that chances. If you think back to the Munster final towards the last quarter, Waterford really trying to run hard at the Limerick defence, but they didn't get a sight of goal. I'm pretty sure, I don't think Nicky Quaid has really made a save or had a shot to deal with for goal in the last kind of two games. There was one Bennett free right in the Munster final, which kind of was tipped over by a defender. So I don't think Limerick really kind of let the teams have kind of a sight of goal. I mean, they've only conceded 3 goals in the championship so far. One of those was a defensive mistake by them against Clare. I think it was Barry Nash got caught under a high ball. One of the goals that Tipperary got probably shouldn't have stood, with Noel McGrath throwing the ball. So they just don't allow these kind of opportunities to present themselves. And I really thought that the goals were the impetus that Waterford have gotten in the last couple of games, the brilliant start against Clare, and then obviously kind of ignited the second half comeback. So, I mean, the real question, I think they'll probably need maybe 2 goals to win this game. And are Limerick really going to give them that opportunity? It's not just in the 6 backs, but the work rate of Garrod Hegarty and Tom Morrissey, the way they come back. And Sinead's kind of touched on it, I suppose, in terms of the way they kind of hounded the Galway players. I think we're going to see something similar there. So that to me would be a big question in terms of Waterford. Can they bridge that gap from the Munster final, and whether they're going to replicate the goal scoring from recent matches?
So Limerick for you?
Yeah, I think they deserve the tag of favouritism. I think the way they've been kind of tested in the Munster final and by Galway, they were still able to kind of weather the storm, and they have the kind of options off the bench. I think Waterford will come close. I think they have improved since the Munster final. The handicap betting with William Hill is Waterford +4 at 10 to 11. I think there might be something in that. There was 4 points separating them in the Munster final, but I think they might just get a little bit closer. But I still think Limerick, and probably maybe on the proviso that Aaron Gillane is fit. I do think that could be a big thing against them, but they do still have enough options in Peter Casey, James Flanagan to come in. I mentioned Breen and a couple of others. So yeah, I think Limerick haven't put a foot wrong all year, and I think that they're going to do the clean sweep of hurling for 2020 on Sunday.
Shane, who wins and how, to your mind?
Oh yeah, again, it's I'm over and back on this, and the fitness of Aaron Gillane is key. So if I go with Limerick and after 10 minutes you see that he's not right, then can we just add in that I'll then change to Waterford? It's such a tough one. I mean, as I said, I think Limerick are a little bit vulnerable in the sense that they've had to rejig players, moving the 2018 man of the match from centre forward with 4 points, Kyle Hayes, back to wing back. Good and all as he is. Has he been tested at senior level playing in the backs? He obviously was under 21 centre back. Dan Morrissey full back. What will he be like if he's ran at a few times with ball in space? Barry Nash, a native forward, will he like it as well? The other side, I think the full backline for Waterford has looked a little bit ropey. Conor Prunty is a player I really like, but you could possibly trace 4 of their last 5 goals conceded against Kilkenny and Clare to him. McNulty and Kenny, the good players, can they be exposed as well? Will Kevin Moran last the pace for 70 plus minutes? You know, there are question marks on both sides. And then the puck out thing is huge. Like Nicky Quaid and Stephen O'Keefe, whoever has the better game here will most likely win the All-Star. And again, just to reference Sean Flynn's stats, he was just looking at Waterford and Limerick in their 4 games. So off their own puck out, Waterford have scored. I'm just going to convert goals to points here for the simplicity. Waterford has scored off their own point 47 to Limerick's 24. So that's a big gap there. But conceded off their own puck out 16 to 10. Limerick conceding 10. So very frugal off their own puck out. But off the opposition puck out, Waterford have turned teams over for 19 points. Limerick for 34. So they're really, really going to punish you. But yeah, look, just at the heel of the hunt, I think it's going to be unbelievably tough game to call. I think the 2 teams are going to batter each other. They play similar. They're very well set up in the puckouts. They run hard at you. They've both got brilliant players on both sides. But heel of the hunt, I'm going to go with Limerick grudgingly. I like what Fintan said on the +4 for Waterford as well. So yeah, just about Limerick.
Lovely. Let's try to figure out then who's going to win the camogie. Sinead, starting with you here, right? Galway feel as though there are maybe parallels between them and Limerick in hurling a little bit in that they are more than a coming force, obviously. Like they won an All-Ireland recently. Kilkenny, on the other hand, are nothing like Waterford in that they're perennial contenders in the final. But out of what they've been at 7 of the last 8 finals, they've won 1 in 2016. So their problem is the fact that they actually lose finals, which is completely at odds with what we'd associate generally with the Kilkenny men. So it's a really interesting dynamic here. You have a situation in which Kilkenny are looking to win their first one in 4 years. A win for them could kind of define an era as well, if you like, probably more looking forward in the next couple of years. But equally, if Galway win, they look like the force. So it's finely poised. Break it down for us. What can we expect from this game from a kind of a tactical point of view based on what you saw in both semi-finals?
Yeah, well, on Kilkenny's losing record in finals, it comes up every time they reach a final. And even if they win this time, it's going to come up again because the numbers are kind of so stark. Like you pointed it out there, it's 7 finals since 2013. 5 in a row. They've only won the final once in 2016, which was their first since 1994, under Anne Downey, who I think captained Kilkenny to the win that time. So it comes up a lot. And I mean, you can kind of make what you want from those numbers. Like historically, like Kilkenny were actually a really dominant force in camogie in earlier times. Between 85 and 91, they won 7 in a row. They won another then in 94, and then it was just kind of barren season until they won in 2016. And we've seen it happen before, like the Cork ladies. Well, I suppose it's not that long since they won their big run of finals. They're still getting to finals, but maybe struggling to kind of get back there and win it again. It's like as if you have this big burst of wins, and then once you fall off, it's kind of hard to get back on again. So yeah, Kilkenny know how to get to finals, and Brian Dowling's like this is their first final under him as well. And again, it's something else that when you try and bring it up with players, they keep trying to deflect that, you know, last year and the years before don't matter, and that this year is a new year. So that's like it is a factor. Like if we to look at the semi-final and coming up against Cork, who they've played in some of those finals that they lost, like they really started quite badly. They were 6 points down after the first 8 minutes. I was kind of struggling to figure out what I was looking at. Cork were savaging them down the middle. They were just taking them for points. They were drawing frees. Gemma O'Connor, who is traditionally a back, actually scored a goal, and she started corner forward, and it was a proper forwards goal. She got the ball in space and just stuck it. Kilkenny on the other end couldn't get a breath. They were struggling to hit the target. They hit 3 wides in a row, really kind of struggled to get into it. But once they hit their stride, they were very, very patient, and they reeled Cork in. And that was what really stood out to me, was that they played this game as a full game. They didn't just kind of go and not kind of spread out the pace that they needed to get through it all. Like Denise Gall and Anne Dalton were fantastic with that. Denise was brilliant from the frees, and then they both kind of combined for the first goal, with Gall hitting the ball in long from free. Dalton grabbed it, turned and stuck it in the net, and from there they just brought Cork in, and in the second half they went, I think, 21 minutes. Brian Dowling actually mentioned this in his post-match interviews, that they went 21 minutes in the second half without a score, because obviously at that stage Cork were the ones who were trying to get back into the game, and Kilkenny, they held firm, they pressed them out and forced Cork to hit wides. When Kilkenny were on the back foot, they showed what they were made of to get to the final, and when it was put on the other foot for Cork, they just couldn't match them. So Kilkenny can definitely get to finals. It's getting past that mental block in finals and trying to get through. Galway, on the other hand, like, they've quite a good record in finals. They haven't made as many as Kilkenny, but they already have 2 since 2013, because they actually won that one in 2013 and then as well last year. And getting back to a final again, I suppose on paper it was probably a bit more straightforward for them, particularly in the semi-final, beating Tipperary. They won by 6 points. Now, they were full value for the win. Like, I was very, very impressed, and I've said this a few times in podcasts, I was very impressed with Tipperary and the fight they brought to them. They're very, very close on breaking through into the kind of the top teams that are contesting for finals. And I thought, I think the patient side of Kilkenny's play, that was so key for getting into the final. And Galway, like, if you could contrast it with last year's final, they put 3 goals past Kilkenny. And that's going to be something that Kilkenny will have to look at big time this year. Carrie Dolan and the likes of Ailish Riley. Ailish Riley got 2 of the goals last year. Carrie got 1-2 the last day. That's going to be something that Kilkenny are going to have to really look at. Now, they have their goal poachers themselves. They got 2 the last day against Cork. But that's going to be a big area. Like, Galway have got fiery forwards, and I suppose it's kind of like it's business as usual for them. Like, they're back in a final. Sarah Dervin, the captain, was speaking the last day for the captain's day, and it just doesn't seem to be knocking a breeze out of her. Like, you know, she doesn't sound like somebody who's preparing for an All-Ireland final. The composure that she uses kind of going into it, and maybe that ties in with what we've said before about not having crowds, not having to worry about the hype, and staying away from the club and the clubhouses, and trying to keep things low key for Captain's Day or for launches and things like that. Maybe that's playing into their favour, because when I was watching them in the final last year, they didn't seem as panicky as Kilkenny. Like, Kilkenny had gotten into a final and Cork weren't there, and I think people probably thought this is Kilkenny's to lose, and then Galway were able to come in under the radar like that. So going into this final, there is obviously a good bit of pressure on Kilkenny, because, like, how many more finals are you going to get into before you get over the line? And there's obviously less pressure on Galway. They've already proven it last year, back in a final again this year. Didn't really have much to worry about in their semi-final compared to Kilkenny. So there's that element to it as well.
Yeah, Shane, looking at Kilkenny in that semi-final against Cork, it might be no wonder that they look to deflect from the sequence of finals that they've lost, or their record in finals over the last 8 years, because they showed something in that game that would suggest they don't have the same hang-ups, really. Like, they were playing Cork, who stung them so late in 2018. There was probably a feeling among those watching the match that Cork were about to turn the screw. As Sinead mentioned, Kilkenny went 21 minutes without scoring, but they still pressured Cork into enough wides where they were able to maintain their lead. And also, the fact that it's their first year under a new manager as well, like, they've gotten... It feels like they maybe have gotten through a bit of a psychological barrier in the semi-final under a new manager in their first year, which could be almost transformative for them as they get to a final. Maybe it is time to park the 6 All-Ireland defeats and look at this team for what it is, and kind of treat it in isolation from the players' point of view. They're on the right track. They've already kind of set the record straight, if you like, against Cork, or proven that they can get over them, so that they won't have the same inhibition looking at Galway, even though it is a repeat of last year's final.
I think there's probably pressure on both teams here, because Galway have never done back-to-back in their history, and Kilkenny, you know, who wants to be the side that loses 4 in a row? Is it the Buffalo Bills who did it in the NFL in the 90s? I think I have the right team there, but you don't want that hanging over you. But when I watched those 2 semi-finals, and they were good games, I thought to myself, Cork have kind of like, they're in a great position, but I felt they really left it behind them. Like Gemma O'Connor finished lovely for that goal that she scored, but she'd been out injured as far as I can recall. And I didn't think that she was moving as well as she can do, because she's normally quite dominant. And I'm trying to think of the name of the other girl who was up in the full forward line with her, number 14, was Collins or McCarthy. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I felt that they had too static a full forward line as the game went on, and they didn't use the ball particularly well. And I think Cork shot themselves in the foot in an awful lot of senses in this game. Now, the other side, Anne Dalton is obviously a very good player and has been for a number of years. Denise Gall, like you mentioned. I wonder, is the loss of Katie Power to a cruciate? And she had a poor final last year against Galway. I wonder, is that going to come back and sting them for a finish? Because they did really well to come back and win that game. But I did get the sense that they weren't flowing 100% well. Now, you could say the same thing about Galway against Tipperary. They were a little bit up and down, but I think that they showed just a little bit more, like Carrie Dole and Aoife Donoghue, who had a great final last year. Niamh Kilkenny, there's probably more in her as well. So that's why I'm starting to lean more and more towards Galway. I just think that there's probably a little bit more in them. And Kilkenny, that loss of Katie Power, you need every shooter possibly, especially at Croke Park. And that's why I just start to lean more towards Galway.
Fintan, how do you see it breaking down for us? Like, it does. Again, looking at the men's game, we're talking about it being really a 50-50 or close enough to it. And this one does have a similar vibe to it. There are reasons to suggest that both teams can win the game. It's just about who actually does it on the day, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you touched on something interesting there in terms of the nature of Kilkenny's semi-final performance, that will give them a lot of confidence, because I think it was 21 minutes was it at the end of the game. They went without scoring. They had that slow start. And Shane has touched on maybe aspects of Cork's play that were poor, but still I think it must give Kilkenny a lot of confidence to kind of dig it out like that, because one of the things I think about their finals is that they've lost them in so many different ways, which I think must be kind of tougher for a team to take, in that they were kind of decisively beaten, I think, in 13 or 14. You mentioned the 18 points that Cork scored in the last minute. Like, Cork also got a last minute point in 17 to beat them by 1. And then last year, the thing that stands out for me is the scoreline from last year's final, which was probably the best final there has been over the last couple of years. And I think some of the camogie finals have been a bit kind of drab, bit scrappy in low scoring. I mean, Kilkenny scored 17 points last year and losing. I think it was, from what I could gather with a quick look earlier, it was the joint highest total by a losing team in an All-Ireland camogie final. I think Cork got 3-8 one of the games in the 80s. Like, it was a lot more than what they'd scored in the previous years, and yet they still couldn't manage to get over the line. And I mean, I suppose one of the biggest aspects of that game, and I know, the makeup of both sides have changed a little bit, but it is still a big reference point, is just the goals at the start of the game that they conceded. And obviously they conceded an early one against Cork, but if you look at it, they were kind of chasing that game, and 3 first half goals, and I think they were all, especially the second and third ones, were kind of a bit preventable. They had a lot of bodies back, I remember, for the second one, and then the third one, they actually come out with the ball, got turned over. The next thing was a one-on-one situation inside, and Niamh Kilkenny was kind of pulling the strings. So I think it's a big testament to them to get back to the final, because I think, like I've said, scoring 17 points last year, you're probably thinking, when you look at what they struggled to do in the previous years, kind of what more do we have to do? So I think the nature of that semi-final display will give them a lot. But the point Jane makes as well about Galway in terms of retention, there are kind of similarities to Limerick with me in this sense that this is maybe Galway Camogie's time, I mean, the one in 96, then, 13 was a big kind of an emotional breakthrough for them. Like, Therese Maher was kind of that brilliant kind of iconic photo of kind of her sinking to her knees at the final whistle when they finally won. And then they've won last year. But I mean, they've only 3 in their whole history for, a kind of a traditional camogie superpower. So I think for this team, they have that kind of monkey off their back in terms of, having made the breakthrough. A few of them would have been there in 13. And interesting as well, I know Sinead would have been kind of on the captain's day, but they've talked a good bit about I think they have a bit of a cause over this thing with their intermediate team not being allowed to compete in the championship, that they would have had about 40 or 50 kind of involved in training. The management was the same for both teams last year. And then there was, because I suppose the changed circumstances this year, there was a decision made late on that second choice sides from leading counties weren't allowed to play in the intermediate level. And I know the goal manager would have spoken to Sinead and Colin Murray, and he was really, really strong about that. And I think Sarah Dervin touched on it as well. So I wonder, is that going to be a little maybe of a factor, kind of spurring them on to kind of do it for those players on Saturday night?
Yeah, Sinead, that hurt on Galway's behalf seemed really genuine, didn't it? And understandably too, in the sense that when you have a group that size, and all of a sudden you're ostensibly having to call about half of them, or at least they're likely not to receive action. It can be a powerful thing as well, because as we know in dressing rooms, it's easy enough to create a kind of a sense of us against the world. And when you have a large panel like that, including an intermediate panel, kind of all pulling towards one team, all kind of lending their, well wishes, and more than that, actual physical support as well, it can create a bit of a dangerous beast. Like, they're going to come in with, it'll feel like a real county effort, I think, this time, and not just an effort of that senior squad.
Yeah, I suppose there's motivational hurt like that for both sides. Like Shane mentioned Katie Power there, and she's going to be such a symbol for Kilkenny going into this final. But yeah, what you mentioned there about Galway and the intermediates and them not being able to compete in their competition has been a real issue for them. And like, it's oftentimes in journalism, like when you're trying to get a story, it's you having to try and contact the team and get them to talk to you. But in this instance, it's actually Cathal Murray who contacted me, and he wanted to do a story about this. He wanted to get their feelings on the matter out there. And I spoke to him, and he was, very passionate about it. Like, this is so unfair on our extended family, basically. It's a massive panel of, about that 50 players who all train together. And it's this unique thing about camogie. Like, I played ladies football, so I have no real experience with camogie and how this dynamic works, that you have your intermediate and your senior county teams training side by side, same manager. On All Ireland final day, if they both reach the final, the manager's out on the sideline with the intermediate team, and then result, win or lose, they're going down the tunnel and then having to get ready for the senior final. And I mean, particularly with Cathal Murray last year, like, his intermediates lost, and then he's having to let go of that hurt, go down the tunnel and meet up with your seniors and get ready for that final. Like, I don't know how they do it. And I mean, when you talk to them, they just tell you, well, sure, look, we know nothing more. And you have to kind of take it like that. If that's what they've always done, then they've obviously just kind of gotten used to that dynamic themselves. So yeah, not having them or not having them being able to compete this year has definitely affected them. And Sarah, I mentioned this, or I spoke to her about this on the captain's day, and she said it was very weird even not having that number of people all training together. And look, it's COVID related. It's not the Camogie Association deciding that Galway can't compete in the intermediate competition, but a rule was obviously decided that counties that have participation in both the intermediates and the senior competitions, they have to only have one team. And look, it's an unfortunate situation to be in. And when we started this GA championship in under kind of COVID conditions, we all knew that there was going to have to be compromises made, and we were going to have to accept that it wasn't going to be a normal championship. And that's when the idea of not having all the panel members at the stadiums, that's where that came in. John Kiley obviously mentioned it. He said that it wasn't fair, and then eventually it came about that the rule was changed, and they can bring their extended panel members to the matches. But it's this idea that we can't expect everything to run as normal. Families won't be at the stadiums, and I know that was brought up as well from players. They thought that family members of the players and the panel members should be allowed to attend the games. And unfortunately, if we start kind of going down that road, like, how many more compromises are we going to do a U-turn on before it's basically 80,000 people in Croke Park? So yeah, it's definitely going to be something in the back of their minds. But I do think that's that powerful symbol, that powerful image of Katie Power being in Páirc Keeve with the crutches on at the sideline, willing the girls on. I think that was huge for Kilkenny, and she's a massive player for them. She plays with her heart in her sleeve. And I know when Anne Downey stepped down last year, I was interviewing her afterwards, and I mean, she could barely hold the tears back that she was gone. So that's a girl with, amber and was it black and amber in her veins. Like, she really is just Kilkenny through and through, and not having her on the pitch on Saturday is going to be a huge factor for Kilkenny. And I think that if I was gonna sway either way, I think that's where Kilkenny might go over the line, because they have the absence of her and the hurt of those finals. Like, I mean, they can't convince me that they've forgotten them or tried to park them. Like, no one ever remembers the wins as much as the losses, and they don't leave your memory. And I think that's what will drive them on.
Before I get the lads' predictions, just to stick with yourself briefly, Sinead, and look at this game within a wider women's sports context. It's probably a nice break for yourself as a journalist, given what's gone on in the football over the last week or so, yourself and Emma Duffy on the 42 have been particularly busy, as have everybody, I think, covering GA, or have had their eyes on that over the last few days. So this is an opportunity to remind people that, remind them of the actual spectacle that it can be. Are you expecting it to, live up to its billing, if you like, in that this, when we look at last year's final and how high scoring it was, it does, now weather dependent as well, because last year's final was played at a different time of year, but conditions pending, can this be kind of an open enough, free-flowing game, one that will get people excited? Because as Fintan mentioned earlier, there probably have been a number of finals recently which haven't been great on the eye in terms of play, but have had their drama, to be fair. If you look at 2017, 2018, they're kind of last-second interventions that have won the game. So, like, can this one be a reminder to people of why they should be watching this in the first place? You know what I mean?
Definitely. I definitely think we're going to see an open, free-flowing game of camogie, and we saw that in the semi-finals. Like, one thing about camogie is it can be quite bunched. Like, I remember looking at one stage and there were rucks going on in the middle of the field, and I'd say there was maybe only 3 players outside it, so it can be a little bit bunched, but it was definitely a really, like, both games were free flow, and maybe the first game was a bit more of a score fest than the second one was a little bit cagier. But I would expect that, certainly. I think we can, I don't want to obviously tempt fate, but I think we can say that those arguments about it being overly defensive or drab, or the referees not letting the game flow, I think we have moved on from that, and you have to credit the Camogie Association for amending the rules slightly to allow for that. And yeah, definitely this game is coming at a very, very important time for women's sport after what happened at the weekend. Like, I was speaking on our GA Weekly podcast, and I did say that I was predicting that the controversy of the semi-final would be a big, talking point for the next few days. I didn't expect it to kind of blow up as much as it did. I think it actually might have been an item on the 6-1, not even in the sports section. It might have actually been like a headline at the top of the hour, and you don't want that. Like, when you get into sports journalism, you want to write about sport. Personally, I've no problem covering these controversies when they come up, and especially if it amounts to a conversation or a wider conversation about where we're going with the sport. And obviously the biggest thing that's kind of fallen out of this is that, the idea of should the associations merge. That's definitely coming back up again. Whether it'll go anywhere, I don't know. But sometimes it's no harm for a spotlight to be shining on this. Now, it's not fair, obviously, on Galway the way that it all panned out. But definitely this game is so key to happen so soon after it, and Camogie definitely need to get this right from a logistics point of view. You don't want back-to-back weeks of controversy. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. It's at 7:00, it's in Croke Park, so we're not going to have surface issues. Timing is perfect. I imagine both sides will travel up and down on the day. Obviously, I'm not privy to their travel details like I have been. I've never been more aware or been more informed about the travel plans of a team than I have in the last few days. So it's definitely important, from that side of things, because you want sport to get back into the conversation. Like, there's loads of things about last week's semi-final that we never got to talk about and never got to really write about, apart from my match report, which, just with the way things were switched at the last minute, it wasn't even the type of match report I'd like to really write. I'd like to get into it and kind of give more breadth about what actually happened. But because we weren't in the normal media section, we were sitting in normal seats. We didn't have desks, so I was basically just kind of literally just taking notes of scores. It was one of those. It was just one of those kind of days. So definitely, this has to kind of go right, just to so that we can be talking more like what we're doing here about the game itself. We want to be talking about, will Carrie Dolan score more goals with Ailish O'Reilly? Like Shane mentioned there's more in Niamh Kilkenny. Is this another, she was brilliant in last year's final. Will she produce a game like that again? Will Kilkenny end the hurt of the last few finals? They're 4-5 at nods with William Hill. So, I've backed them a few times now, and I'm going to stick with it. It's too late now to go back. Not to say that Galway can't defend their title, but I think Kilkenny will win it, and it's very important that it just goes smoothly. The game itself, that it's on telly. It's on, like, RTE have the coverage of it. I know TG Cahir provide great coverage for the ladies football, but RTE is the main broadcaster. When it's live like that on the main channel, you wanted to go well. The semi-finals, I know, like, in fairness, camogie had its own little controversy in the semi-finals with the timekeeping, and I actually didn't even realise that until after the game. It was like that Con Houlihan line around Italia 90, I don't know, because I was there. Like, everything was fine as far as I was concerned. It was the people at home watching on telly that thought there was an issue around timekeeping. But in fairness, that was more a storm in a teacup, because the Camogie Association came out and said, look, the issue wasn't really on our side. The television clocks were incorrect. The timekeeping was right in both semi-finals. So that kind of came and went fairly quickly. And you just want to make sure that, especially when we've gotten this chance to play the championships, we didn't think we'd get them a few months ago. And I know that's been mentioned so many times, but when we're so close now to the final, you want to make sure that it goes as planned.
Will it go as planned for Kilkenny, Fintan, or will it go as planned for Galway? Who do you see winning and how?
I think I'd edge it towards Galway. I think they've been pretty impressive in what they've done in terms of defending the title, obviously in vastly different circumstances. I think that was touched on that they've been waiting a while for the to win it last year, and they've been defending champions for 15 months now. So it's probably, I think Sarah Dervin touched on that they've had the cup for longer than they thought they would. I just thought the manner of the Tipperary win, it was just kind of very controlled. I mean, they only scored one goal, but they probably should have got a few more. And like that seems to give them an early buffer in terms of on the scoreboard and kind of an early cushion. Kilkenny obviously have kind of a lot of hurt and a lot of kind of drive built up, but I would be edging slightly towards Galway. And I suppose just touching on what Sinead said in terms of the occasion, like, I think it's great that, to be honest, it's on the same weekend as the hurling final. I know it's because of the circumstances are different, but I do think it adds to the sense of occasion. I mean, it's gone away from its traditional Sunday afternoon slot. It's on a Saturday night, and maybe that won't be possible going forward, because usually they would have the intermediate and the Premier Junior together with it. And it mightn't be possible to have that, but it does, I think, add to the kind of sporting festival weekend kind of a scheduled sense to it, that it's on Saturday night, and then we've the hurling final to look forward to on Sunday afternoon.
Can't wait. Shane, take us home, Galway or Kilkenny for you?
Yeah, I think I'm just about going to plumb for Galway, and I think Sarah Dervin at full back. Probably, I expect a big game from her. She was player of the match in the semi-final. Aoife Donoghue, if she can repeat her heroics from last year's final again. Niamh Kilkenny, big player. And I just, like, last year's final was brilliant, by the way. And I know we've touched on it, but that was really an exceptional occasion, and I was there watching it. And I think an awful lot of the issues with the previous finals would be down to very fussy refereeing. So I'd hope this one is let flow, and I can see it being a fairly pulsating sort of a game that'll swing both ways, but I think Galway will come out on top.
You can find Shane's work on ourgame.ie. Shane, do you want to talk people through what you do on there if they're unfamiliar, in the unlikely event that they're unfamiliar with your work there?
Yeah, well, it's just like GA videos, analysis, interviews, the whole lot. I mean, Fintan has featured plenty of times in it. So coming up to the All-Ireland, I've interviews with people from both sides, Kieran Carey, a few different players in the hurling show. So if people want to have a look, it's at ourgame.ie.
Yeah, super stuff. Would recommend. Fintan, thank you. And Sinead, thank you as well. Enjoy the weekend.
No worries,
Gav.
Shane.
Thank you to everybody for watching. This was brought to you in association with William Hill. Reminder to gamble responsibly and visit dunlewy.net on how to do so. Best of luck to all the camogie players and hurlers over the course of the weekend. It should be a good one. Until next time, mind yourselves. Take it easy.